Welcome to kindness in real life. After a decade of self-imposed exile from the family he once abandoned, a millionaire is stunned when he sees his estranged wife at the airport, with a young boy who looks exactly like him, forcing him to confront a past he never expected would come back to claim him. Stay tuned as we dive into this emotional journey of regret, love, and the power of forgiveness. Enjoy the story. Andrew Thompson had always measured success in the currency of power, prestige, and profit. At 45, he was a celebrated millionaire whose every decision was calculated to elevate his empire. Yet behind the glossy facade of boardroom victories and immaculate tailored suits lay a secret wound, a choice made a decade ago that refused to fade. 10 years earlier, driven by ambition and a paralyzing fear of failure, Andrew had abandoned his wife, Sarah, simply because she couldn't bear children. That decision, made in a moment of ruthless logic and shattered dreams, had left scars deeper than any financial loss could ever reveal. It was a brisk Friday morning at Chicago's bustling O'Hare International Airport. The corridors teemed with travelers hurrying to catch their flights, the overhead screens announcing departures and arrivals in an unending cascade of information. Andrew strode purposefully through the terminal, his expensive suit impeccably pressed and his leather briefcase a silent testament to his success. Every few seconds, he glanced at his gleaming gold watch, the ticking hands urging him forward toward another business trip, another opportunity to fortify his fortune. Yet, beneath the steady rhythm of his measured steps, an undercurrent of emptiness pulsed relentlessly. Andrew's mind was a battleground of triumph and regret, a cacophony of memories he had long tried to silence. As he navigated through the throng of busy commuters, his thoughts were abruptly shattered by a sight that made him freeze in his tracks. There, amid the rushing crowd, a woman with familiar brown hair glided past him. Her presence was magnetic, stirring dormant memories like a sudden gust of wind. Andrew's heart seized as he recognized her instantly, Sarah. In that instant, the years melted away. Her face, though softened by time, still carried the gentle contours he had once adored. But it wasn't just her that captivated him. By her side walked a young boy of about 10, whose every feature, from his unruly blonde hair to his bright, inquisitive green eyes, mirrored the boy Andrew had once been. For a moment, the noise of the airport dimmed to a distant hum, as if the universe itself held its breath. Andrew's mind was flooded with the image of the day he'd left, a day he recalled with bitter clarity. He had slipped away from the apartment they once shared, leaving behind nothing but a cold, curt letter on the kitchen table, a letter that had sealed Sarah's fate and ignited an inferno of regret that now threatened to consume him. Unable to tear his eyes away, Andrew stood frozen, his mouth agape in disbelief. "Sarah," he murmured under his breath, his voice raw with both shock and yearning. The weight of that abandoned promise crashed over him like a tidal wave. Guilt, regret, and a desperate longing for redemption surged in his veins. Had he, in his ruthless pursuit of success, not only lost the love of his life, but also forsaken the possibility of a family, a son he had never known existed? Determined to face this harrowing twist of fate, Andrew began to push through the throng, his every step fueled by a mix of panic and resolve. He called out tentatively, "Sarah." His voice, hoarse with suppressed emotion, was swallowed by the chaotic din of the terminal. The crowd surged around him, indifferent to the storm raging inside his heart, and he found himself pressed against strangers, each face blurring into anonymity. Yet the memory of Sarah's gentle smile and the boy's bright eyes compelled him forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of desperate maneuvering, Andrew managed to break free from the sea of people and close the distance between himself and the couple. His eyes darted from Sarah's face to the small hand clasped tightly by the young boy. "Who is he?" Andrew demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of hope and dread. Every word seemed to crack the veneer of his carefully constructed life. Sarah's eyes widened with a mixture of sorrow and defiance as she regarded him. The air around them was thick with unspoken history. "This is Michael," she replied softly, her tone laced with both pain and resignation. The single word, "Michael," echoed in Andrew's ears like a death knell. In that instant, the world seemed to tilt. The bustling terminal faded into insignificance, replaced by the overwhelming weight of a past he had long tried to bury. A flood of memories surged through him. The cold letter left behind on a quiet morning, the whispered promises that soon turned to silence, and the unbearable ache of a lost future. Andrew's vision blurred as the enormity of his abandonment crashed down upon him. "Michael," he repeated, the name trembling on his lips as if it were a sacred incantation, a plea for forgiveness from a ghost he could no longer ignore. Sarah's gaze dropped, and for a heartbeat, the air between them was charged with raw emotion. "I always hoped you'd come back, Andrew," she said, her voice barely audible, yet searing with the intensity of years spent in silent yearning. "I never stopped loving you." Her admission, so vulnerable and heartfelt, struck Andrew with the force of 1,000 unspoken apologies. In that moment, Andrew's inner turmoil exploded. His carefully built world of wealth and achievement, his status as a powerful businessman, suddenly seemed hollow. He was confronted by the undeniable truth that his pursuit of money and power had cost him the one thing that truly mattered. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of regret. "I left because I was afraid that I wouldn't be enough, that I wouldn't be able to give you the life you deserved." The confession trembled in the air, laden with remorse and a desperate need for atonement. The boy, Michael, who had been silently observing this poignant reunion, looked up at Andrew with wide, searching eyes that held a mixture of hope and confusion. "Are you my dad?" he asked in a small, tentative voice that seemed too old for a child so young. The question pierced the fragile moment, and Andrew's heart broke anew at the innocence of it. For a long, aching silence, the three of them stood there, each caught in a web of past mistakes and the uncertain promise of reconciliation. The airport's ceaseless bustle continued around them, oblivious to the intimate drama unfolding in its midst. Andrew's mind reeled with conflicting emotions, the crushing guilt of his abandonment, the desperate yearning to reclaim what he had lost, and a dawning realization that his life was now at a crossroads. I want to be here for you," Andrew finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to know you, Michael. I want to make things right." His words, simple yet powerful, seemed to hang in the air as if challenging fate itself. But before the fragile hope could take root, the cacophony of the airport demanded attention. A flight attendant's voice called out, "Sir, your flight is now boarding." The reminder of his business obligations snapped Andrew back to the harsh reality of his world, a world of schedules and commitments that had long obscured the tender truths of his heart. Andrew glanced at the attendant, then back at Sarah and Michael. In that split second, he made a decision that would forever alter the course of his life. "I'm not boarding," he said firmly, his voice resolute despite the tremors of uncertainty that still rippled through him. The attendant looked startled, but Andrew turned away, determined to follow the call of his conscience rather than the dictates of his former life. As he stepped away from the gate, his heart pounded with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Andrew hailed a cab outside the terminal, his mind racing with questions. How had he allowed ambition to blind him for so long? Could he somehow repair the damage done over the past 10 years? And most haunting of all, what secrets lay hidden in the eyes of the child who might be the son he never knew? Inside the taxi, as the vehicle merged into the congested Chicago traffic, Andrew's thoughts swirled like a tempest. His phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls from Vanessa, his current wife, a reminder of the life he had built on the foundation of betrayal and regret. Ignoring the calls, Andrew dialed the number of his old friend and trusted private detective, Frank. "Frank, it's Andrew," he said urgently when the call connected. "I need your help. I need to find Sarah and find Michael. I need to know the truth about what I left behind." The words tumbled out in a rush, laden with the raw emotion of a man who had spent a decade haunted by his own choices. And as the taxi sped along the busy streets of Chicago, Andrew felt, for the first time in many years, that the path ahead might lead not to more riches, but to redemption, a chance to atone for a mistake that had defined his life. In that moment, as the cityscape blurred past the window and the weight of his past pressed down on him, Andrew Thompson vowed that he would do whatever it took to reclaim the family he had lost. The journey was only beginning, and the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty and pain, but it was also illuminated by a fragile, yet undeniable, spark of hope. The bustling terminal of O'Hare was now a blur of hurried commuters and incessant announcements for Andrew Thompson. Yet, in the midst of all the chaos, the image of Sarah and Michael remained indelibly etched in his mind. The shock of their unexpected reunion still pulsed in his veins as he clutched his phone, the call from his old friend Frank echoing in his ear. Determined to find answers and mend the fragments of a broken past, Andrew left the boarding gate with a resolute stride, his mind a whirlwind of regret, guilt, and an unexpected hope. Outside, the cool autumn air bit at his face as he hailed a cab. As the vehicle merged into the relentless Chicago traffic, Andrew's thoughts churned uncontrollably. The sound of car horns and the hum of engines were drowned by memories of the fateful day, a day when ambition had blinded him to love and the possibility of a family. Now, that same ambition was colliding with a reality he could no longer ignore. The image of Sarah's tearful eyes and Michael's uncertain gaze haunted him, each recollection igniting a desperate need for redemption. In the cab's dim interior, Andrew dialed Frank's number with trembling fingers. When the private detective's gruff voice answered, Andrew wasted no time. "Frank, it's me. I need you to start looking for Sarah immediately. I saw her at the airport today, and she was with a boy. Michael, I need to know where they are. What has become of them?" Frank's tone was measured, yet laced with concern. "Andrew, this could change everything. Are you sure about what you saw?" "I'm sure," Andrew replied, his voice tight with a mixture of urgency and sorrow. "It was Sarah, and that boy. He's like a mirror of my own childhood. Frank, I'm terrified that I've lost not just a wife, but a son I never even knew existed. I must find them, no matter what." Frank agreed to begin the investigation immediately and promised to call back with any leads. The cab's engine roared as the cityscape of Chicago rushed past the window, a tapestry of neon lights and dark alleyways that seemed to echo Andrew's turbulent inner world. With every mile, he felt the weight of his past decisions grow heavier, yet also the spark of determination ignite within him. He couldn't return to his old life, not while the memory of what he'd lost beckoned him from every corner. The cab finally pulled up near a modest residential block on Maple Street, a neighborhood Frank had mentioned in his preliminary call. Andrew's heart pounded as he stepped out, his expensive shoes clicking on the pavement. He scanned the area with a mix of anxiety and hope, searching for any sign of Sarah's familiar figure. The street was quiet, too quiet compared to the chaotic airport, and the early morning light softened the edges of the worn buildings, lending an almost nostalgic hue to the scene. As he walked along the sidewalk, Andrew's thoughts wandered back to the day he'd left. The memory was visceral, a cold letter hastily left on a kitchen table, the sound of his footsteps echoing as he disappeared into the night, and Sarah's silent tears as she realized that her world had irrevocably changed. Now, every step he took felt like an attempt to rewrite a past filled with regret. He forced himself to focus on the present, the mission to find Sarah and Michael, to understand the truth behind the boy who bore the reflection of his own lost youth. After a few blocks, Andrew noticed a small, worn sign for an elementary school. The sign read Northview Elementary, and something in his gut told him that this might be a lead. With a racing heart, he approached the building, noticing children playing in the schoolyard and parents chatting in hushed tones as they dropped off their little ones. The innocence of the scene clashed painfully with the tumultuous emotions roiling within him. Inside the school lobby, the atmosphere was unexpectedly warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the sterile corridors of his corporate world. Andrew approached the front desk, where a kind-faced receptionist greeted him. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" Excuse me, Andrew began hesitantly. I'm looking for Sarah Thompson. I believe she works, or at least lived, in this neighborhood. I need to speak with her. His voice wavered between professional detachment and raw emotion. The receptionist's eyes softened as she studied him. Do you mean Sarah Thompson who lives on Maple Street? She asked gently. Andrew nodded, his throat tight with emotion he could no longer conceal. Yes, that's her. A moment later, a young teacher entered the lobby. Mr. Thompson, she inquired, a note of recognition in her tone. I'm Sarah. You're Andrew, aren't you? Her voice was a blend of surprise, sorrow, and something else, an unspoken question of why he had come back after all these years. Andrew's eyes met hers, and for a long, charged moment, the weight of a decade of separation hung between them. I never thought I'd see you again, Sarah, he said, his voice thick with regret and longing. I made a terrible mistake. I abandoned you, and I've carried that burden every day since. Sarah's expression was guarded yet pained. I've spent years wondering if you'd ever return, she said softly, her gaze shifting to the boy who stood nearby, watching the exchange with wide, uncertain eyes. Michael, she added quietly, is my son, the son you left behind. The word struck Andrew with the force of a collapsing wall. Michael, I didn't know, he whispered, his voice trembling as if each syllable was a confession. The room fell silent as Sarah's eyes filled with tears that reflected both the sorrow of the past and a glimmer of hope for reconciliation. Please, Sarah, Andrew pleaded, stepping closer. I need to understand how this happened. I need to know the truth about you, about Michael, about everything. I want to make things right, if you'll allow me. Sarah hesitated, her gaze flickering between Andrew and the young boy at her side. It's not that simple, she murmured. There's a lot you don't know. I've built a life here with Mark by my side, try to protect Michael from the pain of your abandonment. I never expected you to come back. Not like this. Andrew's heart pounded, a mix of desperation and determination swirling within him. I know I can't undo the past, he said, his voice raw, but I can't live with this guilt any longer. I want to be there for Michael. I want to be a father to him. I'm here now, Sarah. I'm here to find redemption, if you'll let me. A tense silence enveloped them as the sound of distant laughter from the schoolyard momentarily broke the heavy atmosphere. Michael's eyes, filled with a child's honest confusion, locked with Andrew's, silently pleading for an explanation he wasn't sure he could provide. I'm so sorry, Andrew repeated, voice cracking under the weight of his remorse. I made a choice that cost us everything. I'm here to try and make it right, no matter how long it takes. At that moment, as the early morning light bathed the school lobby in a gentle glow, the possibility of healing began to shimmer through the darkness of the past. Sarah's guarded expression softened just a fraction, and in her eyes, Andrew saw a flicker of the hope that had sustained her all these years. The truth was out there, tangled in the years of separation and regret, and now, after a decade of silence, Andrew had returned to seek it. With a heavy sigh, Sarah finally spoke. I can't promise it will be easy, Andrew. Michael's been through so much, and I've learned to protect him. But if you're truly here to be part of our lives, then maybe we can start slowly. Andrew nodded, the determination in his eyes unwavering despite the tumult of emotions. I will do whatever it takes. I'll earn your trust, and I'll earn Michael's. I know I've no right to ask for forgiveness, but I'm ready to pay that price. As the conversation continued in hushed tones within the quiet corridor of the school, the seeds of a tentative reunion were planted, a fragile hope that the wounds of the past might, with time and effort, begin to heal. Outside, the city of Chicago roared on, unaware that in one small corner, a broken man was beginning the arduous journey toward redemption and the possibility of rebuilding a family he had once so callously abandoned. Andrew left the elementary school that morning with a storm of emotions swirling inside him. The brief but charged conversation with Sarah had opened a wound he'd long thought sealed by time and distance. Now, with the undeniable truth of Michael's existence pounding in his heart, He knew that merely standing at the threshold of reconciliation wasn't enough. He had to act, to uncover every hidden truth behind his past, and to understand the intricate path that had led Sarah and Michael to build a life without him. Later that afternoon, back in the quiet confines of his upscale hotel room overlooking Chicago's skyline, Andrew sat at a mahogany desk that bore silent witness to years of corporate strategy and calculated decisions. Today, however, his thoughts were far more personal and unguarded. The bright neon lights outside contrasted starkly with the dark tide of regret and determination that now surged through him. With trembling hands, he dialed the number of his trusted friend and private detective, Frank Martin, a man whose steady voice had guided him through many tough times in the past. After a few rings, Frank's gruff voice answered, "Andrew, what's going on?" Andrew took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Frank, I need your help. I've seen Sarah today at the airport, and there's a boy with her. Michael. I never knew I had a son, Frank. I need to find out everything. I need to know how this happened." There was a pause on the other end. Then Frank replied, "Andrew, this could change everything. Are you sure you're ready for what you might uncover?" The question hung in the air. Andrew's voice trembled slightly as he responded, "I'm terrified, Frank, terrified of what I missed, of the years I lost. But I can't live with this guilt any longer. I need to make things right, no matter what it costs." Frank sighed, his tone softening. "All right, Andrew, I'll start digging. I need you to send me all the details you have about Sarah, her last known address, her workplace, anything that might help me track her movements over the years. And tell me about that boy. Is there any record of his school or anything that might confirm his identity?" Andrew hesitated for a moment before providing the details. "Sarah's been teaching at Northview Elementary in the North Side. I know she lived on Maple Street. And Michael, well, I remember a few vague things. I can't believe I abandoned them, Frank. I need to know if I can salvage what's left of this family." Frank's voice carried a note of solemn understanding. "I'll get on it right away. This isn't just a case, it's your life, Andrew. And you must be prepared for some painful truths." As the call ended, Andrew leaned back in his chair, staring out at the city lights that danced like distant memories against the night sky. His mind raced with fragments of the past. The bitter cold of that fateful night when he left Sarah, the regret that followed him through lonely boardrooms, and the aching emptiness that no amount of wealth could ever fill. Now, all those memories were converging into a single, desperate need for redemption. Unable to sleep, Andrew spent the night pacing his hotel room, the hum of the city outside a constant reminder of the life he had once taken for granted. Every so often, he would pause by the window, his eyes scanning the darkness as if searching for a sign, a beacon of hope that might guide him toward reconciliation. The guilt was overwhelming, but beneath it lay a nascent determination to confront his past head-on. The next morning, a pale sun rose over the city, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out like fingers from the depths of memory. Andrew awoke early, his thoughts still tangled with regret and longing. He dressed quickly, his expensive suit feeling strangely heavy as if it carried the weight of his past decisions. Before leaving the hotel, he scribbled a note to himself on a scrap of paper. "Find Sarah. Find Michael. Make this right." He tucked it into his inner pocket, a small reminder of the journey he was about to embark on. At breakfast, Andrew's mind was miles away from the meticulously arranged dishes on his table. He replayed the moment he'd seen Sarah at the airport, the shock in his eyes, the haunting recognition in Michael's gaze, and felt a burning need to reclaim a part of his lost humanity. The luxurious hotel lobby, usually a sanctuary of calm and order, now felt like a cold chamber where his past was waiting to be exhumed. After breakfast, Andrew made his way to the hotel's business center, where he drafted an email to Frank summarizing every detail he could recall. He attached scanned copies of old photographs and documents that hinted at his shared past with Sarah, images of happier times, candid moments that now felt bittersweet in their stark contrast to his current reality. As he hit send, he felt a small measure of relief, as if the act of sharing his secrets with a trusted friend might lighten the burden he carried. The day stretched on slowly as Andrew sat in his hotel room, awaiting Frank's first update. He turned on the television absent-mindedly, but even the bright colors and lively chatter couldn't dispel the darkness in his thoughts. Instead, he found himself lost in a montage of memories. A younger Andrew laughing with Sarah in a sunlit park, the tender moments they shared over coffee, and the quiet sadness in her eyes on the day he left. Each memory was a razor-sharp reminder of his irreversible mistake, yet also fueled a desperate hope that he might somehow repair what had been broken. Finally, as afternoon turned to dusk, the phone rang once again. Andrew answered with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "Andrew Thompson," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Andrew, it's Frank," came the measured reply. "I found something interesting. I tracked Sarah's recent movements, and she's been living in the same neighborhood on Maple Street all these years. More than that, I've confirmed that Michael is indeed her son, born shortly after you left. There's even a record from Northview Elementary that shows Michael has been attending since he was very young." Andrew's heart pounded at the confirmation. "Michael, my son. I can't believe it. Frank, have you found anything else? Anything that might tell me where I can meet them?" Frank paused, then said, "There's a community center nearby where Sarah frequently volunteers. I got a tip that she often spent her evenings there tutoring children. It might be the best place to find her without causing a scene at home." Relief and trepidation mingled in Andrew's voice. "Thank you, Frank. I need to see her to see Michael. I need to understand how I can fix this." "I understand, Andrew," Frank replied gently. "But be prepared. This isn't going to be easy. The past is full of pain, and sometimes the truth cuts deeper than we expect." Andrew closed his eyes, the weight of Frank's words pressing upon him. He knew that the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty and the potential for further heartbreak. Yet he also felt an undeniable pull, a need to reclaim the family he had abandoned and to confront the consequences of his choices head-on. As dusk settled over Chicago, Andrew sat by the window of his hotel room, gazing out at the city below. The vibrant lights mingled with the deep shadows, mirroring the complex interplay of hope and regret within him. He whispered to himself, "I have to make this right. I have to find Sarah and Michael, no matter what it takes." The stage was set for a journey that would lead him deep into the heart of his past, challenging everything he had once believed about success, ambition, and the true cost of lost love. With every passing moment, the seed of redemption was planted a little deeper, and though the road ahead was dark and uncertain, Andrew Thompson was ready to face the storm. The twilight over Chicago draped the city in a melancholy glow as Andrew Thompson drove toward the community center Frank had mentioned. Every mile brought him closer to a moment that he had both dreaded and longed for, an encounter that might bridge the gap between the life he had built and the family he'd abandoned. His mind was a tempest of anticipation, guilt, and a spark of hope he wasn't sure he deserved. The community center was a modest brick building tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, far removed from the glitz of corporate towers. As Andrew parked his car, he took a deep breath, steadying his racing heart. He reminded himself that this wasn't about reclaiming lost wealth or salvaging an image. It was about reclaiming a part of himself that he had sacrificed long ago. Inside, the center buzzed softly with the sounds of evening tutoring sessions and group activities. Andrew's eyes darted around, searching for a familiar figure. It wasn't long before he spotted her, Sarah Thompson, standing near a table cluttered with books and art supplies, surrounded by a small group of children. The soft smile on her face, the way she leaned over to help a child with a drawing, all spoke of a resilience that had kept her moving forward despite the weight of the past. Andrew's heart pounded as he walked slowly toward her, each step laden with memories and regrets. When she finally looked up, their eyes met, a moment that seemed to suspend time. There was a cautious curiosity in her gaze, as if she were weighing the possibility of forgiveness against the pain of old wounds. "Sarah," Andrew began, his voice hoarse yet determined. "It's me, Andrew." For a long, silent second, she did not speak. The bustling murmurs around them faded into a background hum as Sarah's eyes flickered with a mixture of surprise, sorrow, and a guarded hope. Andrew, she replied, her tone quiet, almost as if she were questioning whether the man before her was truly the one who had vanished from her life a decade ago. Andrew took a step closer, his hands trembling slightly. I've been searching for you. I've been searching for answers, for redemption. He confessed, his eyes never leaving hers. I know I abandoned you, and I know I left behind more than just a promise. I left a void that I can never fill with wealth or success. The words hung in the air between them. Sarah's gaze dropped for a moment, and when it lifted again, there was an unmistakable glimmer of vulnerability. I spent every day wondering if you'd ever come back, she said softly. I built a life for Michael and me, even when I was drowning in loneliness. I never stopped hoping, though, that someday, maybe you'd find your way back to us. A group of children, sensing the tension, continued their activities, but their presence seemed to underscore the significance of the reunion rather than distract from it. Andrew's thoughts turned to Michael, a name that resonated like a distant echo of his lost youth, and he hesitated before speaking again. I need to know the truth about Michael, he said, his voice wavering with both desperation and longing. I need to understand how our paths diverged and why I was so blind to what truly mattered. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she looked toward the door as if weighing whether to let the past fully spill into the present. Michael is my son, Andrew, she said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. He's been my strength and my sorrow all these years. I never told you much because I thought you wouldn't want to hear it, or that you wouldn't care. Andrew's heart twisted painfully at her words. I'm sorry, he repeated, voice cracking under the weight of his remorse. I never believed that I'd lost not just you, but a chance to be a father. I left because I was so consumed by my own ambition, I didn't see the true value of what we had. A heavy silence settled over them, punctuated only by the soft rustle of papers and distant laughter of children playing. Sarah took a steadying breath before speaking. I did what I had to do, Andrew. I raised Michael on my own, and I've done everything in my power to protect him from the pain of your absence. It wasn't easy. Every day, I had to make choices that hurt me deeply, but that I believe were necessary for both of us to survive. Andrew's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he stepped forward. I can't change what I did, he said, but I can try to be there now. I want to understand how Michael came to be, what his life has been like, and if there's any way I can help mend the rift I created. Sarah's expression hardened with a blend of caution and longing. Andrew, you have no idea what you're asking. Michael's grown up without you, and the pain of your absence is etched into every moment of his life. It isn't just about understanding, it's about healing wounds that might never fully close. Andrew reached out, his hand trembling as he tried to bridge the gap between them. I know I have no right, he whispered. I'm asking for forgiveness that I don't deserve, but I need to try. I need to be a part of Michael's life. I need to see him, to talk to him. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Sarah looked at his outstretched hand, her eyes reflecting years of hurt and resilience. Maybe, she said slowly, if you're truly committed to changing, if you're ready to face the consequences of your choices, then there might be a way forward. Before Andrew could press further, the intercom over the community center crackled with an announcement, and the gentle chaos of evening routines began to reassert itself. Children gathered their things, and a teacher called out to a group of students. In that moment, Sarah glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at Andrew. I have to get back to work, she murmured, her tone gentle but firm. But I promise we'll talk more about this. I want to show you Michael when the time is right. Andrew's heart sank and soared simultaneously. I understand, he said, his voice low. I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. As Sarah turned and walked away, the weight of the past seemed to press down on Andrew even more. The hallway echoed with her footsteps, each one a reminder of the years he had lost. He stood there alone for a long moment, the pain of regret mingling with a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he could reclaim what had been shattered. Outside, the night deepened over Chicago, and the neon lights of the community center flickered against the darkness like beacons of possibility. Andrew slowly made his way to a quiet corner of the lobby, his mind racing with plans and promises. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, a journey toward redemption that demanded humility, accountability, and an unwavering commitment to mend the bonds he had broken. In a quiet booth at the back of the center, Andrew pulled out his phone and sent a text to Frank. Need update. Imachara. She says Michael's my son. I'm ready to do this, no matter what it takes. His finger hovered over the send button for a moment before he pressed it, sealing his commitment with a single tap. As the message sent ripples through the digital ether, Andrew closed his eyes and tried to imagine the boy who might be the son he never knew, a son whose eyes mirrored his own, whose life had been shaped by his absence. The thought was both unbearable and inspiring. Every regret, every decision made in pursuit of a hollow success, now converged into a single, desperate plea for forgiveness. In that pivotal moment, with the echo of Sarah's parting footsteps and the soft murmur of evening voices surrounding him, Andrew vowed to cross the threshold from a life dominated by regret and ambition into one illuminated by honesty, responsibility, and love. The journey to mend a broken family had begun, and though the road ahead promised hardships and heartache, it also held the promise of redemption, a promise that he was finally ready to pursue. With renewed determination, Andrew stepped out of the community center into the cool night air. He gazed up at the sprawling city, its lights flickering like distant hopes, and whispered to the silent darkness, "I will make this right." And in that solitary vow, a tiny spark of possibility ignited, lighting the way for the long, uncertain journey ahead. The chill of early morning gave way to the tender glow of a new day as Andrew Thompson stood before the modest house on Maple Street, a place where over the past weeks, he had gathered every shred of courage to piece together the remnants of a shattered family. The past months had been a turbulent odyssey, desperate phone calls with Frank, sleepless nights haunted by memories of his departure, and painstaking attempts to reconcile with Sarah and Michael. Now, on this crisp morning, everything was poised on the brink of a new beginning. Andrew's heart pounded as he approached the front door. Every step was heavy with regret and hope. He could recall every painful moment of his past. The cold letter he'd left on the kitchen table, Sarah's tearful goodbyes, the echo of his own footsteps as he fled a life that once brimmed with promise. Today, however, the promise was not one of wealth or success, but of redemption and love. The door swung open, and there she was. Sarah, dressed simply in a worn sweater and jeans that spoke of practical strength, looked at him with eyes that held both pain and cautious expectation. Behind her, peeking from the doorway, stood Michael, a boy whose bright, curious gaze and unruly blonde hair were undeniable reflections of a part of Andrew he had long denied. "Andrew?" Sarah's voice trembled, soft yet laden with a decade of unspoken words. "What are you doing here?" For a long moment, Andrew could only stand there, his gaze flickering between the woman who had once been his soulmate and the child who embodied his lost chance. I couldn't stay away," he finally managed, his voice raw with remorse. "I've been haunted by every decision I made. The day I left, every lonely night afterward. I need to try and make things right." Michael's eyes, wide and uncomprehending, shifted between his mother and this stranger whose presence stirred memories of a past he had only heard about in hushed tones. "Mom, who is this?" he asked, his tone a mixture of curiosity and the cautious reserve of a child who had been protected for too long. Sarah inhaled slowly, searching Andrew's face as if trying to decide whether he deserved a place in their fragile world. "This is Andrew," she said quietly. "He is my past, and maybe, if you'll let him, he could be a part of our future too." A silence fell. The early morning light filtered in through the window, casting long shadows that seemed to intertwine with the memories of all they had lost. Andrew felt the ache of years of separation pulse through him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, taking a step forward. "I left because I was so consumed by ambition, so terrified that I wouldn't be enough. I made a mistake that cost me more than I ever imagined. I lost you, and I lost the chance to be a father. I, I want to be here now to try to mend what I broke." Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It won't be simple, Andrew," she murmured, her voice a blend of sorrow and strength. "Michael has grown up without you. He doesn't know your voice, your touch. There's so much you missed. And you're not the same man who walked away." Andrew's gaze fell to his hands, clenched tightly at his sides. "I know," he said, voice low. "Every day I regret leaving you. I've spent these years in pursuit of success, thinking money and power could fill the void. But now I see what matters isn't wealth. It's family, it's love, it's being there when it counts." Michael shifted uncomfortably, his small voice breaking the silence. "Do you really want to be my dad?" he asked, almost hesitantly, as if testing the waters of a long-awaited reunion. Andrew's eyes met Michael's, and in that moment, the turbulent storm of regret and hope within him stilled into something resolute. "Yes, Michael," he said softly. "I want nothing more than to be there for you. I want to learn about your world, to share in your joys, and help shoulder your sorrows. I know I have no right to ask forgiveness, but I promise I will try every day to be the father you deserve." The words hung in the air like a fragile promise, and Sarah's face softened further as she looked between them. "This isn't about erasing the past," she said slowly, "but about learning to live with it and maybe eventually healing together." Her voice trembled with both fear and an almost imperceptible hope. "I've built my life here for Michael, for us, in the absence of you. And now, perhaps, there's room to rebuild a part of what we lost." Andrew's heart ached with the enormity of the moment. The pain of abandonment, the guilt of his selfish choices, and the realization of what his absence had cost him. These feelings swirled inside him, mingling with a newfound determination. "I understand that I have a lot to make up for," he said, stepping closer, his hand reaching out cautiously. "I'm not here to undo the past, but I want to create a future, one where you, Michael, and I can be a family." The silence that followed was deep and reflective, as if the very walls of the modest house absorbed every word. Michael, his gaze shifting from his mother to Andrew, finally spoke. I want to try too," he said in a small, trembling voice. "But it's hard. I missed you so much." Andrew's eyes filled with tears as he knelt to Michael's level. "I'm sorry, Michael," he whispered. "I'm sorry for every moment you had to feel alone. I'll do whatever it takes to be here for you from now on." He reached out and gently took Michael's hand, a gesture filled with tentative warmth and sincere promise. Outside, the morning had fully broken, and the sounds of the neighborhood, a distant lawn mower, a bird's chirp, created a backdrop that was both ordinary and full of potential. The three of them stood there in the soft glow of the new day, caught in the delicate balance between what had been lost and what might yet be restored. Sarah looked at Andrew with eyes that held both caution and the faint glimmer of forgiveness. "It won't be easy, Andrew. There will be days when the pain of the past is too much to bear. But if you're truly committed, if you're willing to work for this family, then maybe we can find a way forward." Andrew nodded solemnly, his gaze never leaving Sarah's. "I'm committed," he vowed, his voice steady with conviction. "I'm here to face the consequences of my actions, to rebuild what I shattered, and to honor the truth of our past. I may have lost years, but I refuse to lose any more time." The day unfolded slowly, with each passing hour reinforcing the fragile hope that had taken root. Over a shared cup of coffee at the small kitchen table, Sarah began to recount the years she had navigated alone. The struggles, the quiet victories, the moments of despair, and the small lights of joy that Michael had brought into her life. Andrew listened, each word etching a deeper understanding into his heart, while Michael sat nearby, his eyes wide with cautious curiosity. "I want to know everything," Andrew said quietly as they spoke. "I want to learn about Michael's world, his school, his friends, what makes him smile. I want to be a part of it all, even if I have to start from scratch." Sarah's voice wavered as she replied, "It will take time, Andrew. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight, especially when wounds run so deep. But perhaps With every small step, we can begin to mend what was broken. The conversation continued long into the afternoon. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with life. Yet inside, in that modest kitchen, the three of them forged a tentative bond through honest words and shared tears. Andrew's eyes brimmed with determination as he promised himself, in them, that he would never let his ambition overshadow the true value of family again. As dusk settled and the sky painted itself in hues of lavender and gold, Andrew stood at the doorstep of Sarah's home, gazing at Michael playing in the yard. The sight stirred emotions he had long suppressed. The laughter of a child, the sound of a soccer ball being kicked, the simple joy of a life that continued despite the shadows of the past. Turning to Sarah, Andrew said softly, "I'm ready to try. I want to be here for Michael. I want to make amends for my mistakes." His voice was steady, carrying the weight of a man who had learned that true wealth lay not in money, but in love and connection. Sarah's eyes met his with a mixture of resolve and hope. "Then let's take it one day at a time," she replied. "We start with a conversation. We rebuild trust slowly. And maybe, just maybe, we'll create a future where the pain of the past becomes a distant memory, replaced by the promise of forgiveness and a new beginning." In that moment, as the first stars began to twinkle in the twilight sky, Andrew, Sarah, and Michael stood together at the threshold of reconciliation. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, laden with the scars of old wounds and the challenges of building something new. Yet, in the gentle embrace of the evening, there was a palpable sense of possibility, a spark that, if nurtured, could grow into a lasting beacon of hope. Andrew took one last look at the yard, at Michael's joyful play, and whispered to himself, "I will make this right." And with that vow echoing in the quiet night, a new chapter in their lives began. A chapter where love, forgiveness, and the relentless pursuit of redemption could finally heal even the deepest scars. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of redemption and reconciliation. If you found Andrew's story as moving and thought-provoking as we did, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to Kindness in Real Life. Your subscription and comments not only help us reach more people with these heartfelt stories, but also inspire us to continue sharing content that touches the soul. We truly appreciate your time and support. Thank you for being part of our community, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories.